Right now, over 3 billion people play video games, and almost every single one of them is gripping a direct descendant of a World War I aircraft control stick. Before 1903, every machine that left the ground was nearly impossible to control. Pilots wrestled with wires, levers, and wings that seemed to have minds of their own. The Wright brothers solved part of the problem with a hip cradle, a padded bar the pilots swung with their body to warp the wings and steer. It worked barely. As aircraft grew heavier and faster, pilots needed something more precise, something they could grip in one hand and respond to in an instant. French aviation pioneer Louis Blériot fitted his monoplane with a pivoting vertical column, the first widely adopted control stick. He flew it across the English Channel in 1909. Push the stick forward, the nose dips. Pull back, it climbs. Lean it left or right, the wings bank. It was intuitive in a way no hip cradle ever could be. By 1914, the stick had spread across nearly every fighter aircraft in Europe. And somewhere in those cockpits, pilots started calling it something informal, the joystick. The earliest documented use in writing comes from a letter by British pilot and actor Robert Loring, dated around 1910, where he refers to the aircraft's control lever as the joystick. Nobody wrote down exactly why. The best theory is simple. After years of awkward, clumsy flying machines, a stick that finally worked felt like joy. In the skies above the Somme and Ypres, a pilot's survival came down to fractions of a second, and the stick gripped in their right hand made the difference. When the war ended in 1918, the joystick didn't go anywhere. It was refined and standardized across a new generation of civil and military aircraft. By World War II, the joystick controlled Spitfires, Mustangs, and Zeros. Hundreds of thousands of pilots trained on it. The grip became muscle memory for a generation. Even before combat, pilots practiced on the Link Trainer, an enclosed ground-based simulator from the 1930s that used a real joystick and rudder pedals to teach instrument flying without leaving the ground. When the war ended in 1945, a generation of engineers came home with deeply ingrained intuitions about control sticks, and they were about to build computers. Engineers at MIT, building the Whirlwind computer for the U.S. Navy, used light pens and toggle switches to interact with radar displays, and began asking what other physical inputs might work. Through the 1950s, analog joystick-style controllers appeared in military and industrial settings, guiding radar contacts, steering early robotic arms, directing machine tools. Programmer Steve Russell at MIT wrote Space War, widely considered one of the first true video games. Players piloted spaceships on a screen using toggle switches to steer. Within months, MIT students built dedicated joystick controllers specifically for Space War, a purpose-built hardware designed purely for a game. It may be the earliest example of anyone doing that. Through the late 1960s, early arcade machines tried everything: paddles, wheels, buttons, knobs. Nothing felt natural for fast, directional action. Nolan Bushnell founded Atari and launched Pong, a sensation built around rotating paddle controllers. But Bushnell knew paddles weren't the future of arcade gaming. In 1974, Atari's key games division released Tank, giving each player a pair of joysticks to maneuver armored vehicles across a battlefield. Players picked it up in seconds, pushed toward something to move toward it. The learning curve nearly disappeared, and arcades took notice. Tomohiro Nishikato at Taito Corporation built Space Invaders around a single joystick and a fire button. The game became a global phenomenon, and the input design spread with it. Walk into any arcade between 1978 and 1983, and you'd find essentially one input device: a stick and a button. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaga, all joystick games. In 1977, Atari released the 2600 home console, packaged with the CX40 joystick, black, square-bodied, one orange button. It became the defining image of home gaming. The CX40 read 8 directions of input. Atari reportedly manufactured it for under $2 and sold it for $9. By some estimates, tens of millions were sold over the console's lifespan. By 1982, the joystick was more than a controller. It was a symbol shorthand for a whole new way of spending an afternoon. Toy store shelves filled floor to ceiling with them. Within 3 years, dozens of companies produced joystick clones. The CX40's shape and 9-pin plug became the informal industry standard. One connector shared across an entire generation of hardware. Home computers, the Commodore 64, the MSX Standard, and dozens of others, adopted compatible joystick ports. If you owned a home computer in 1983, you probably owned a joystick. But a single stick and one button had a limit. As games grew more complex, developers ran out of inputs. The joystick needed to evolve or be replaced. Nintendo engineer Gunpei Yokoi, designing controls for the Game & Watch handheld, invented the directional pad, a flat cross-shaped rocker that replaced the stick with 4 precise digital directions. When the Nintendo Entertainment System launched in North America in 1985, the D-pad came with it. The stick retreated to PC gaming, flight simulators, and a dwindling arcade market. On personal computers through the late 80s and early 90s, the joystick survived in a dedicated niche. Microsoft Flight Simulator and its competitors kept the cockpit lineage alive on the desktop. But three-dimensional games needed more than 8 directions. They needed degrees, the ability to tilt slightly left, not snap left. The D-pad couldn't do it. Nintendo's 64 controller introduced the analog thumbstick to mainstream home gaming. A miniaturized, spring-loaded stick that read hundreds of positions rather than 8. Super Mario 64 demonstrated it perfectly. Tilt the stick gently, Mario walks. Push it fully, he runs. For the first time, a home controller had learned nuance. Sony's DualShock added a second analog stick. Your left thumb moved your character, your right thumb controlled the camera. That architecture became the template every major controller follows today. Every major controller released after 1997, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch Pro, Steam Deck, is some version of the dual analog layout. The joystick, doubled and miniaturized. Force feedback joysticks arrived for PC in the late 90s, letting hardware push back against you. Fly into a stall, and the stick shook in your hand. The cockpit metaphor had come full circle. Today's virtual reality controllers track your hand in 3-dimensional space, but at their core, most still rely on a miniature analog thumbstick for movement. The stick persists. Outside gaming, joysticks guide surgical robots inside human bodies, position cranes on city skylines, and fly military drones over conflict zones. The cockpit, it turns out, never really left. The global gaming controller market is valued, by some estimates, at over $10 billion a year. Every dollar traces a line back to a pivoting stick in a fabric hand-wire biplane. Joystick now appears in every major dictionary, translated into dozens of languages, used in contexts Robert Loring never imagined when he first wrote it down in 1910. 3 generations of technology, 3 completely different worlds: cockpit, arcade cabinet, living room, and the same human gesture connecting all of them: wrap your hand around something and push. The next time you pick up a controller, look at those 2 analog sticks. One of them is the direct conceptual descendant of a leather-wrapped lever in a Sopwith Camel over the Western Front. The most durable technologies are the ones that disappear into habit. Nobody thinks about the history when they reach for a controller. They just reach. And somehow, that stick keeps showing up. This is Origins. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. There's a new origin every single morning.